thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Congratulations on the book.
It's a big cover of it.
A meatloaf in every oven, 2 chatty cooks, 1 iconic dish, and dozens of recipes from moms to Mario Batales. How did this start?
How did this start? My co-author, Jennifer Steinhauer, whom I work with at the New York Times, was looking to do a cookbook to follow up on one that she'd written. And I said, you should do an all meatloaf cookbook. And she said, you should do it with me. And so we did.
And that was it?
That was pretty much it. I mean, we thought it would be a fun diversion. Jennifer covers the United States Congress. So as you can imagine, there's not a lot of joy in that.
Especially right now.
I write a lot about politics and social issues, and sometimes there's not a lot of joy in that either. We thought this would be a nice diversion, a nice distraction. So
you used to be a food critic, right?
I was the restaurant critic for the Times from 2004 to 2009. Yeah.
Right, and one of the things that we see in the introduction of the book is that you're not that confident in your ability to cook, right?
You know, I'm not, and meatloaf was the one thing I was comfortable making. It seems like it has such a great margin for error. You know, it seems like child's play. It's like Play-Doh. You know, you're constantly sticking your hands in it. And the one kind of genre of food for which I had a bunch of recipes that I trusted and which I felt comfortable making for guests was meatloaf. So this was a sort of natural thing to do.
So what was it like? When were the two of you writing this?
We were writing this, I guess, you know, we finished it about a year ago, so subtract 2 years from that, and we were doing it over a long course of time because we were still in our normal jobs, and it takes a good long time to develop recipes. You know, you'll come up with an idea for a recipe, in this case a meatloaf, and you'll have to make it 3 or 4 times, tweaking things before you come up with something you feel you can share with the world. You know?
So this is before the two of you were really writing about, you know, what was going on in the election last year. You had finished it already, so this didn't get to be a pleasant diversion for you.
Well, yeah, no, only the beginning. Up. No, in fact, it was finished. It's funny, the book came out, and a couple of weeks after the book came out, Chris Christie went to the White House and apparently had lunch with Donald Trump, and later he gave interviews, and he said Donald Trump made him eat the meatloaf, and that Donald Trump's belief was that the best thing on the White House lunch menu was meatloaf. Our book had just come out, and people said, well, do you have a recipe from Donald Trump in the book? And we're like, you don't understand, when this went to bed, the idea went to bed, meaning to press or whatever, the idea that Donald Trump would be our president was still a fairy tale.
It still is.
Well, it does feel a little bit like one at times, especially today, maybe. But yeah, it turns out there are videos. If any of you want to go onto YouTube, if this sounds like a fun passage of time, you can find a video from 10 years ago of Donald Trump and Melania on Martha Stewart's show making meatloaf, making Donald Trump's mother's meatloaf with Martha Stewart. And it actually is pretty hilarious because it looks like neither Donald or Melania has been in the kitchen before. Melania is wearing this low-cut dress that is the opposite of anything you would consider.
Do either of them have aprons on?
I think they do. I can't remember. But he's like wearing a suit. She looks like she's ready for a ball, you know, nothing anyone would cook in, and they're presumably reenacting their kitchen routine for Martha
Stewart. Mix it up with my hands, like I touch the meat and the loaf.
Yeah, Donald mixing that meatloaf with his tiny, undersized hands. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
So did this feel like a bit of a diversion for the two of you, writing this? I mean, not from the campaign or anything like that, because it was prior to that, but from what you normally cover.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for everybody who cooks, or anybody who cooks, I think being in the kitchen, pouring yourself a glass of wine, I believe in drinking while cooking, but then I believe in drinking while doing a lot of things. I think it is an escape, absolutely. And I think meatloaf, again, because it feels so elemental, it feels so much like a connection to childhood, there's so much nostalgia there, I think it feels even more relaxing than something else, yeah.
Now, you dedicate the book to Nora Ephron.
Yeah.
The lovely, wonderful Nora Ephron, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. Why Nora Ephron?
She was a good friend of each of ours. Interestingly, we each met her separately. It wasn't because Jennifer and I were friends.
Does everyone who works at the Times, do they know Nora Ephron?
No, but she did have a lot of times. Nora was really into food and restaurants. And I met her right toward the beginning of my period as restaurant critic. And I do think there was an element of she wanted to make sure she knew me because she was reading me as a restaurant critic. It was one of those life turns that was so neat for me because for years, whenever I would feel depressed, I would read Heartburn because I thought it was the funniest book I'd ever read. And so she was a sort of heroine of mine, but I had been friends with her for 4 or 5 years before I was willing to tell her that because I was afraid it would sound sycophantic or make her uncomfortable. Finally, I knew her well enough to say, Nora, I want to let you know not only, do I feel great friendship for you and am I delighted to have you in my life, but when I met you, it was a sort of crazy thing for me because I had been reading you over and over again for so long.
How did she respond?
She was delighted by it, and I think we hugged or something like that. She did something else neat for me. Her last movie, Julie and Julia, she did something that didn't get a lot of attention at the time, which is she studied the movie with people from the food world.
You have a moment in that.
I have a kind of cameo in it with people from the food world whose faces might not be recognizable. So like you had to almost know really deeply the food world to even recognize who was flitting across the screen. We're not in the credits, and I have a scene at the end. My lines hit the cutting room floor.
What were your lines?
There's something about I was playing a hedge fund guy from the Hamptons who was at this dinner party. But if you watch Julie and Julia at the end of the last meal that Amy Adams makes, she brings this astonishing-looking duck to the table, and there are about 6 people there all clapping idiotically at the arrival of the duck. And I'm the idiot sitting closest to where she ends up sitting, clapping probably the most spastically. That's me. That's my Julie and Julia.
No AD or anyone came over to you and were like, you don't have to clap that much. Like, take it down.
Well,
You're
no one thought
overacting
my
right now.
clapping was strange, but when I watched the movie, I mean, I think, if people saw that clapping, they wouldn't have given Nicole Kidman such a hard time about the Oscars clapping,
Well, she had the weird, like, hand-bent fingers thing.
Yeah, I
going
have
on.
something else going on that I can't describe, but just watch the movie again. Fast forward to the end.
So what were you most surprised when it came to some of these recipes and the chefs that you reached out to for a meatloaf recipe?
Well, the chefs, I mean, I got to know a lot of chefs as I was exiting the restaurant critic job. When you are the restaurant critic, you make a point of not knowing the chefs because you don't want to be influenced. You don't want to be in an uncomfortable position where you're writing something negative about someone whom you're friendly with. But as you exit the job, a lot of chefs will reach out to you and say, for years, you've been a big force in my life and I want to know you. And you become friends with some of them, and they really do accord you a lot of kind of continued vestigial respect. And almost every chef, everyone but one that we reached out to immediately said, yes, I would love to contribute, donate a meatloaf recipe to your book. And chefs are generous people. They're in the hospitality industry. They do what they do because they like to please and feed people. And that was
Love to see the look on a face when
Exactly.
when someone bites into
Right.
their food.
And that was very much reflected in their willingness. And most of them got the recipes to us in like record time. Really, I mean, I can't thank them enough.
What made you leave being a restaurant critic?
I'd been doing it for 5.5 years. It is a very kind of binding form. It's X many words. You kind of do the same thing over and over again. I felt like I'd skinned that cat about as many ways as I could skin it. And I had a memoir coming out, and the memoir was very personal, very revealing, and there was no way to go out in the world and talk about that memoir and do justice to the publicity for it without showing my face and being present. And when you're a restaurant critic, although a lot of chefs and restaurateurs end up knowing exactly what you look like, you don't make it easy. You never let your photo be taken. You don't do interviews like this. I needed to transition to a phase where I could sit down with someone like you and talk about my life in my book.
What year did your memoir come out?
2009, the year I stopped being a restaurant
2009.
critic.
So that's when you started being a restaurant critic. But prior to that, you covered the Bush campaign. You wrote a book called Ambling into History.
I did, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And what prompted that? Were you already writing about political and social issues prior to Bush?
Most of my journalism career has been about more classic forms of journalism, writing about social issues, writing about politics. I was the main reporter covering George W. Bush's presidential campaign for the New York Times. And so from about August of 1999 through the Florida recount, every one of my days was writing something about George W. Bush. I probably interviewed him 13, 14 times over the course of that period. I was the person at the Times who was best known to them, and so he was a daily huge factor in my life, and I had many things that I'd seen on the campaign trail, many experiences with him that I wanted to kind of commit to paper for good, and so I wrote that book, Ambling into History.
Now, allow me to poorly characterize your book here for a second, excuse me. But, the book, in many ways, starts with you having a certain opinion of George W. Bush, a somewhat dim-witted figure who has no business entering into this political race. But you sort of change your tune on him a little bit by the end of the book in the way that he gains respect from you. You end up respecting him to a certain degree.
Well, the book came out right after 9/11, and so the freshest stuff in the book is the way he behaved and spoke immediately after 9/11, long before the bad intelligence or the doctored intelligence on Iraq, long before that ill-advised invasion. But the main thing the book talks about is what an odd fit for the presidency he was. I mean, this was a guy who, when he stepped to a lectern and addressed a lot of people, came across, that was the worst version of him. But if he was just talking one-on-one with you or me in a private room, you would think, wow, he's a much better conversationalist, much more articulate, much more thoughtful than I see in public.
Kind of person you'd want to to have a beer with.
You want to have a beer with him, but as soon as he stepped into a more formal setting, he sort of lost the best part of himself. And so the book's real theme is kind of mulling that weird paradox and tension. He's a man who it's odd that he chose to seek the presidency because so much of what it was about, not just the formal part, but there's a certain pompousness that goes with it, was kind of antithetical to the way he saw himself. And what's really interesting to me is then he was followed in the presidency by Barack Obama, who was another man who was in a very different way a strange fit for the presidency. Barack Obama kind of hated politics. He was distasteful of the sausage making of politics. And one of the criticisms people sometimes had of his presidency was that he didn't do enough of the rough and tumble, enough of the give and take. Each man is a more private than public man. Each man found certain aspects of the presidency and of Washington really distasteful, and yet ended up going after and achieving the presidency. And I still don't think we've really come to terms with what that means.
And now we have this.
And now, whoa, yeah.
And I bring up your.
And I don't think we've come to terms with what this means either. Yeah.
100%. But I bring up ambling into history and your coverage of George W. Bush and just that sort of that arc that you have with him. And I ask not to indict that arc by any means, but in how we think about Donald Trump, a man who we think is unfit for many of us, think as unfit for the presidency prior.
I'll raise my hand on that. I think he's unfit for the presidency.
But a man who you say both Barack Obama and George W. Bush were more private than public. This is a man who is more public than private. Is there any chance that there can be an arc? Do you have any hope that there could be an arc in this presidency where we could end up the way you felt about George W. Bush at one time?
I feel little hope about that because Donald Trump's arc at this point is pretty long. Not just from the time he stepped out on the campaign trail this time around, but if you go back, he has not changed much in the public square, in the public eye. I have not seen really any evidence of change in him. I remember toward the end of the campaign, I think several points during the end of the campaign, he would mock the idea that he wasn't behaving presidentially. And he would say, oh, I can behave so presidentially and I will behave so presidentially it will bore you. I'm not bored. I don't see that presidential behavior.
I was watching TV for a long time last night.
No,
cable news.
I think he is a man who even more so than other presidents who maybe had a little bit of this tendency, he is a man who is really slave to his impulses. He's slave to his fits of anger. And he's slave to one thing above all other, which is how large he feels he's looming, in the public imagination. I mean, this is a man who sits there at night by all accounts and watches the cable news coverage of himself, rather than perhaps reading something that would illuminate the world to him in a new way. So do I have hope that he will change and that there will be this arc that will lead us all to some great appreciation and respect for Donald Trump? I wish I could say yes, because I care a lot about what happens to this country, period, and what happens to this country under his watch. But I don't feel a lot of hope for that. Do you?
No. Not at all. And I also, not to be totally hopeless, I feel very little hope at the moment in regards to democracy as a whole and how it's holding together under him, in the sense that he doesn't seem like he's going to be punished at all for any of his actions so far. It doesn't seem like he's going to be held accountable by a Republican-controlled Senate.
No, but I think he may have just kind of raised the chances that he will be held accountable. I think what he did with James Comey has opened a Pandora's box. I don't know. I mean, we'll get better and better reporting on this because there are a lot of great reporters, including at the Times, who cover the White House, and they're going to, I think, over the coming days and weeks, bring us greater insight into what the thought was behind this decision. But as we sit here now, just 24 hours, less than 24 hours since James Comey was fired, it does not look like Donald Trump has solved whatever problem he was trying to solve. And it looks like he did the opposite, which
like a classic case of Donald Trump.
Right, and that's why I come back to a man who's slave to his moods and his tempers. This feels to me like a decision that was made to make him feel good, to kind of exact some sort of revenge on somebody who at various moments has made his life uncomfortable. It does not feel to me like the carefully considered, thinking of the long-term smart decision of someone who may be trying to evade scrutiny.
I don't think a man who's bankrupted, 4 or 5 casinos really thinks that well of the long-term game,
Yeah, well, long-range, high-minded, these are not the phrases I associate with our current president.
One more question really about Donald Trump and his administration is a lot of people are asking questions as to what a reporter's job is. I know you're not a reporter, but you know you cover the media, you cover politics,
And
I've
been a conventional reporter. Yeah.
What a reporter's job is in this administration, in the face of so much lying. There's not even twists now, or there's not even spin anymore. It's just straight up lying, and it's really hard to hold them accountable. You almost can't be a classic reporter anymore. You have to be a litigator. We almost need lawyers going around and being reporters. What do you think about that?
Well, you can be a classic reporter, but you just have to add this one thing, which is it used to not be the case that a president and so many people around a president would look at you and literally give you an alternative fact that is in fact a lie. We need to do what we've always done, which is call things correctly. And in this case, it means sometimes using the word lie, and it means sometimes saying, you know, the president said this, that's not true. This notion that people can say whatever they want, and you present that as one argument, and then you make that the equivalent to another pushback, that paradigm does not hold for this particular administration, but the notion that we are supposed to tell you objectively, you know, what is verifiable, what matches the historical record and what doesn't. That's always been the case. It's just what comes out of that now looks a lot different than it did in previous administrations.
Does it feel right now, unlike in history or at any time before, that that democracy is being strained?
I think so. And I think what we're seeing, we've always known this, but we haven't had a test quite like this. Democracy's hard. You know, democracy requires people to be more high-minded than they're often inclined to be. And we all have a responsibility here. You know, I think one thing we could learn from this juncture, and I really hope we'll learn, is that it is important to be attentive and it is important to be informed. And too many Americans, too many Westerners take their democracies for granted. And that could be something really good that would come out of this. More people are engaged in the media, reading news coverage than were before. I like that not just because that's important for the coffers of the New York Times. I like that because it says people are inquisitive in a new way, and it says that they are on guard in a new way. And you should always be that way if you're the citizen of a democracy, because that democracy is only as strong as your participation and your level of information.
What has the vibe been like at the New York Times the last few months?
The vibe in terms of the Trump administration, or in terms of the industry, or?
The industry and the Trump administration, not necessarily the industry, because I know the industry is thriving, for lack of a better word, considering why they're potentially thriving.
It's in a temporary thrive.
A temporary.
The longer arc is not a good one. Yeah.
Right, but what is it? What is the vibe around the company in regards to the Trump administration?
I think
in covering this and how to cover it and what the best angle is. You know, I mean, a lot of people, a lot of news organizations right now want to talk about the lower middle class or the working class and how to talk about them correctly and give their opinions correctly without validating some of those opinions.
I think there's a level of passion that's higher than before because there's a sense that the stakes are really high. And I think there's a degree of self-examination that's greater than it was before, and that's really good. You know, the president has said, not quite truthfully, that the New York Times apologized for its election coverage. Well, if you go back and read what was said, it wasn't really an apology. But what the Times did say, and I think this was important, is, you know, we probably could understand the country a little better than we seemed to, and we could cast a wider gaze and ask questions that we perhaps weren't asking. That's good self-examination. I do think one of the things that's happening at the Times, and I wish it were happening in more of journalism, is that we are, if not daily, then weekly, asking the question of ourselves in meetings, do we understand the country as well as we should? Do we have the tools to do so with the staff we have? How do we make sure that the sort of blinkers or blinders of occupying this particular space of New York City and, you know, having a staff that tends to come from a certain background, how do we adjust for that to make sure that we see and cover the country clearly and fairly? I think those questions are being asked with greater urgency than before, and that's good.
How do you do those things, though? How do you represent the whole country rather than some, when it seems like so much of the country is under the thumb of snake oil salesmen like Fox News? I mean, I'll say that here. I mean, I think what you have with Fox News and what you have with so much corporate or so much right-wing media is you have essentially people making lots and lots of money off of a certain brand of lies and fear. Right,
sure. Well, I mean, what you do is you ask yourself the question when there is snake oil out there, and of course, people don't agree on what the snake oil is. Why is it appealing to the people to whom it's appealing? You know, what is it about their lives? What is it about the broken promises? What is it about, you know, just all of that? What's important is, why do they want that snake oil? and why are they so receptive to it? And the answer to that is crucial. Because again, going back to what the point of a democracy is about kind of bettering the lives of the greatest number of people possible, and rallying everybody, as many people as possible, behind a vision, that is a high-minded, dignified vision that, that accords respect to everybody. And you need everybody in that experiment, and so you need to understand those people who find that snake oil so appealing.
Absolutely. I'm going to change gears here really fast. Back to Nora Ephron. You are going to be signing books at an event at the Taste of Upper West Side, Nora Ephron's stomping ground, and she filmed.
When I met her, she was on the Upper West Side. Then she moved to the Upper East Side, which is where she
moved to the Upper East Side.
She did. Her last years were on the Upper East Side. She used to be in the Apthorpe, in that fantastic building and I think they even used it in the movie of Heartburn. I think that's where they had Meryl Streep living. Yes, I will be signing books. That's the least of it, but there's an event on May 19th, Friday, the Schoolyard at 77th and Columbus, where a lot of the best chefs who have restaurants at the Upper West Side will be serving food, where various aspects of the culinary scene of the Upper West Side, which is an underrated culinary neighborhood, it'll all be on display. And yes, in some back corner, I'll be sitting for an hour to sign books.
But you're mostly going to be there to eat some of the food, I would imagine.
Anywhere I go, I'm there to eat, yeah.
Let's get some questions from the audience. Who has a micro? Right. You.
Hey, so I was just wondering, how's your experience as working in the New York Times helped you write this book?
Which book? The Meatloaf book?
Yeah.
Well, the Meatloaf book is a sort of one-off strangeness in my life. I have had an incredibly, ridiculously diverse number of jobs at the New York Times in my 20-plus years there. I was the Rome bureau chief for a while, so I covered the Vatican and Pope John Paul II. I have been the restaurant critic. I have done an enormous amount of cultural writing. All of that has kind of helped me be nimble, and I think this book is, if nothing else, a kind of manifestation of my nimble approach to writing and journalism. I like to go in a bunch of different directions. Maybe that's how I kind of stave off boredom. My little brother, I wrote a cocktail column for some time. My little brother says I don't have a career, I have an attention deficit disorder, and I think there's great truth to that. This book is a reflection of my attention deficit disorder as it is played out at the New York Times.
And at the New York Times now, you are an op-ed columnist.
I'm an op-ed
And how long have you been doing that?
I think it's coming up on 6 years.
How did that start?
I had left the restaurant critic job. I was writing for the Times Magazine as a full-time writer there. Like in that period, I did like a long piece on Carly Fiorina. I did some other stuff like that. How
did you find Carly?
I was not a big fan of Carly Fiorina. So you can go back and read the piece. She was then running for the Senate in California. And I was not hugely enthused when she then turned her attention. Having lost that miserably, she decided to fail upward, and she ran for president. I think she's looking for something else to run for right now.
Great.
I know.
Maybe we can get another handhold gift.
She seems not to have a great talent for connecting with the public. So I don't know if this running for one thing after another is going to work for her. I ended up doing this. I think they had an opening on the op-ed page, and someone came to me and asked me. And I think partly because I'd written about so many different things, and in some ways an op-ed column can be a job that you use to write about a ton of different things. I wrote a column today about Rome. I wrote a week and a half ago about James Beard. On Sunday I wrote about Hillary Clinton. So it accommodates that sort of flitting from interest to interest.
Controversial story about the op-ed page from the past weeks was the hiring of conservative writer Bret Stephens.
Yes.
What were your thoughts on that?
I think it serves us to have ideological diversity. I know a lot of our readers who disagree with his positions on various things were very upset. But the point, again, of a democracy or of a newspaper is to try to kind of show the world from all of its various angles. And quite frankly, if you looked at our lineup of op-ed columnists, including me, we did not have as much of a representation of conservative viewpoints as the country has, nowhere near. And we haven't, with Bret's hiring, now become like half of our columnists are conservative leaning and half liberal. Far from it. But we were lacking ideological diversity, and Bret is someone who brings that. And he's someone who brings it from a background of, very distinguished work at the Wall Street Journal. He's got a Pulitzer Prize. So I see that hire as a positive thing, nothing else.
Do you worry about that 50-50 ideology? I mean, taking the Times op-ed page out of the equation for this question, do you worry about this need for the 50-50 ideological diversity moving into the future as we see something like on CNN or on MSNBC?
You're talking about like false equivalences.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there are things you cover.
Jeffrey Lord on CNN, who's essentially, will defend anything that the Trump administration does, be it factually accurate or not.
I think that model is really troubling. The idea that you would have a discussion, and regardless of how ludicrous the administration's viewpoint on that particular issue is, and there are some things the administration's viewpoint is no more sensational than of any. The idea that you have to have Kayleigh McEnany or Jeffrey Lord there to say, yes, when the president said the sky had turned red, there was a lot of merit to that. Because if you look at it from a certain angle, or if you just use your imagination, it could be red. I mean, I don't understand, but I know where that comes from. That is not about a search for the truth. That is not about journalism. That is about, we want as many eyeballs as possible.
That's about me watching TV going, oh, here comes Jeffrey Lord.
Right, and or you're hate watching, but there are other people who just, they support Donald Trump. They're looking at him, they support him regardless of the particulars, and they want to see somebody there clapping for him. And so that's about creating a cast that draws the most people. It's like when someone casts an action film and makes sure to hit all these different boxes.
That's what Zucker has said. He's essentially done with CNN. He has outwardly said that he created a dramatic cast, basically.
But that drama doesn't really work for me. I mean, dramatic cast is like, oh, now we'll see Kayleigh fight with so-and-so. Now we'll see Chris Cuomo fight with Kellyanne Conway. I was watching, I think it was this morning, and I'm increasingly mystified by why she even goes on TV when it becomes this sort of like theater that one can predict of various people kind of screaming at her and her wriggling out of it as best she can, as if she's some sort of ideological Houdini. I mean, she's more like David Blaine, and I think I wrote this in a column, than she is like any sort of, thoughtful creature. But I just don't think, I mean, the media, you have to sell papers. You have to get ratings, to continue doing your job, to fund your bureaus, to make sure there's enough money for someone to go into a war zone where we need eyes, and to report from there. But I don't feel like some of what happens on CNN when they're just putting like the automatic Trump apologist, against the Democratic Hellcat and letting them go after each other. I don't see how anybody watching is illuminated by that. If you're on the Democrat Hellcat side, you feel kind of like some sort of blood rush from that. And same with the other, but you're not ending up with any better understanding of what's going on in the world or any better understanding of that issue than you had when the discussion began.
I completely agree. Next question.
Hey, Frank. So I have a meatloaf dilemma for you. So my mom's meatloaf is and always will be my favorite meal that she makes, but as my tastes have changed and as my skills in the kitchen have evolved, I've realized there might be some ways to make the recipe better. How do you think I should best communicate that to her, or should I just keep my mouth shut?
Well, unless you're serving the meatloaf to her, I think this can be your secret, right? She doesn't need to know that you've wandered off script. Or you could tinker and serve it to her and see what she thinks of it and not present it as I've improved it, but just say I've had some fun with it. My mother's meatloaf is one of my favorite. It's the first recipe in this book, but the recipe in the book is actually tinkered from the way she made it. And I make it for my dad. My mother's long gone. And he loves it. He doesn't even notice the difference, and I draw no attention to the fact that I've replaced some of her breadcrumbs with some soaked bread and stuff like that. I know, between us, it's a little better than my mom's. He should go to his grave thinking that it's a perfect execution of my mom's. And so I think, what you and your meatloaf do is between the two of you, not necessarily needing to be shared by your audience.
I think we have time for one more question right
Hello.
there.
Thank you for being here. So what was the best piece of advice you've been given in your career, before your career started?
I'll tell you, it came, that's a great question, thank you. It came, I was doing an Outward Bound course between high school and college. Do you know what Outward Bound is? Or I don't know how Outward Bound is a wilderness course. There are different lengths, but the classic course is about 3.5 weeks long. And mine was in the mountains of Central Oregon, and although it was in July, like when we got to the highest altitudes, it was actually snowy, or there was still snow on the mountains. I had never, ever even been camping. I grew up in a family that, we didn't sleep in sleeping bags in the backyard. Everybody was sort of afraid of bugs and grass, right? And it was so incredibly hard for me to get through this course because it was so alien to me to be sleeping outside, to be going to the bathroom outside, all the sorts of discomforts of the wilderness and the rigor of what we were doing physically. And I remember after 7 days, I went to the instructor, and I said, you know, I know there are provisions where you can you can airlift someone out before it's all over. I think I need to go. Like, I'm just not going to make it. I'm having a miserable time. I was there because I was on a scholarship to college that included that. So he knew that, and he knew I was an excellent student in those sorts of things, and even an excellent athlete on my own terms, which was swimming, which has nothing to do with the wilderness. And he looked at me and he said, everything you've done in your life, that you've excelled at because it sort of it met your natural abilities. And he said, there can be something really, really rewarding about succeeding, or at least enduring, on a tangent that's not natural to you. And then he said to me, and this is the piece of advice, he said, in life there are things you enjoy doing, and there are things you enjoy having done. And the things you enjoy having done, that enjoyment lasts much longer. Truer words were never spoken to me, and I think about that all the time.
Do you think we'll think about that at the end of the Trump administration?
You mean there are presidents you enjoy doing and presidents you enjoy having done? I don't know.
Frank, thank you so much for talking to me. It's been a pleasure. The book is on shelves now, right?
Yeah.
And people can get signed copies from you at the Taste of the Upper West Side. What night was that again?
Friday, May 19th. I'll be there between like 7:15 and 8:15.
Excellent.
77th and Columbus.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Frank. Pleasure having you. Thank you, sir.